global leader of eco-friendly future materials. Green tomorrow with POSCO.
Coming up on Arirang News. President Yoon calls for thorough follow-up measures from Sunday's Seoul-Tokyo summit, ranging from security and the economy to future generation exchanges. We look into the South Korean inspection team heading to Fukushima later this month, the possibility of Japan's engagement in the Washington Declaration, and Kishida's remarks on victims during Japan's colonial rule. Also on the South Korea-US summit last month, Seoul's finance chief says the government will go all out with follow-up measures in 10 major sectors, picking semiconductors as the top priority. Another deadly mass shooting in Texas has taken at least 9 lives, including the gunman, prompting President Biden to demand stricter gun laws. 3 Korean Americans were among the victims. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin on the reaction from the Seoul-Tokyo summit. President Yoon has ordered his top aides to carry out a thorough follow-up on what was discussed with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida. As had been agreed, a team of experts from South Korea will be sent to Fukushima later this month to inspect the planned release of wastewater from the crippled nuclear power plant. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young starts us off.
A South Korean inspection team will head to Fukushima later this month to review the safety of Japan's treated radioactive wastewater that authorities plan to release into the ocean. This comes after President Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Sunday agreed to Seoul's independent inspection of the wastewater stored at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. At a joint press conference following their almost 2-hour-long talks, the two leaders announced measures to overcome sensitive sticking points in bilateral ties, as the neighbours mend fences in the face of various geopolitical and economic challenges. In particular, the two touched upon sensitive matters. First, on dispatching an independent team of South Korean experts to inspect the Fukushima wastewater. The Japanese PM said he is aware of South Koreans' concerns and hopes there will be an outcome based on a science-based review. Seoul's foreign ministry said Monday that a team of experts will be selected from relevant agencies and there will be a bilateral consultation between director generals to discuss the details of the team's dispatch, currently scheduled for May 23rd or 24th. The inspectors are likely to meet with Tokyo's industry officials and Tokyo Electric Power Company, which operates the Fukushima plant, as well as review underwater tunnel facilities that discharge water into the ocean. In another move to grow their value-based relationship, the two leaders also said they will visit a memorial park in Hiroshima together to honor Korean victims of the atomic bomb in 1945. Yoon confirmed the visit will take place when he attends the G7 summit there later this month upon Kishida's invitation. Both leaders said they're looking forward to deepening their value-based cooperation on broader global goals at the G7 meeting. Following the summit, Yoon on Monday called for thorough follow-up measures on security, industry, science and technology, culture and youth exchanges that he discussed with Kishida. Marking the first time in 12 years that a Japanese leader has visited Seoul for a summit, Kishida's 2-day trip has put the so-called shuttle diplomacy back in full swing, reciprocating Yoon's visit to Tokyo in March. It seems there is more shuttling to come as the South Korean president heads to Hiroshima in less than 2 weeks, where he is also expected to hold a 3-way summit with Kishida and Joe Biden. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
There has been a mixed reaction here in the nation over Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's remarks deemed to be directed towards Korean forced labor victims during Japan's colonial rule. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has the experts' take on his remarks.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, the message from Japan's Prime Minister Kishida regarding the Korean victims subjected to wartime forced labor was not much different from the one he gave when he met President Yoon in March, as he still avoided using the word apology. But for the first time, he did say that he felt heartbroken for those who had to work in difficult conditions.
As I said when President Yoon visited Tokyo in March, our government's stance remains and will continue to remain that we uphold the historical recognition made by previous cabinets, including the joint declaration made in October 1998. My heart aches for those who had to work under difficult conditions at the time.
Japan has been saying that it would continue to, quote, uphold the stance of previous cabinets, including the joint declaration between the former leaders of the two countries, made in 1998, instead of using the word apology. The joint statement by former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and former Japanese Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi includes Tokyo's deep remorse and heartfelt apology for causing tremendous damage and suffering to Koreans during its colonial rule. An expert assessed that although Kishida's words did not amount to a sincere apology, it was a meaningful step.
Historical issues are the biggest hurdle the two countries have to overcome, so it's not easy to get a satisfying answer right away. So I would say that Prime Minister Kishida at least tried as much as he can to show how he feels.
But another expert told Arirang News that the remarks were not meaningful at all, saying they cannot even be seen as an expression of sorrow, as Kishida did not even specifically say those words were for the Korean victims of forced labor, and because he did not mention Japan's colonial rule.
In order for Kishida's remarks to be meaningful, Japan needs to take care of issues related to wartime forced labor like Hashima Island and the Sado mine. But Japan isn't doing any of that, so I don't think those remarks were sincere. They had no meaning.
배은지, 아리랑 뉴스.
Meanwhile, just prior to his departure from Seoul on this Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida sat down with 6 leaders of Korean business entities, including the Korean Chamber of Commerce. Their talks underscore the importance of active collaboration between Korea's chip makers and Japan's materials, parts, and equipment providers. They also touched upon boosting cooperation in the fields of energy and EV batteries. However, specific measures have yet to be addressed. Meeting his Japanese counterpart, President Yoon has hinted that he's open to Japan's engagement in the Washington Declaration with the U.S. Our foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung spoke to experts on how likely it is.
During summit talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Sunday, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol opened the possibility of Japan's future participation in the Washington Declaration.
그리고 이 워싱턴 선언은 일단 한국과 그 미국의 그 양자 간의 베이스로 그 합의된 내용입니다. 그렇지만 일본의 참여를 배제하지는 않습니다.
The Washington Declaration was issued by Yoon and U.S. President Joe Biden during their summit last month. The essence of the agreement is to strengthen extended deterrence against North Korea's nuclear threats. Yoon said South Korea can cooperate with Japan at any time once discussions are on track and Japan is ready to cooperate with the U.S. on the matter. The president, however, added that the Washington Declaration has not been finalized and that more discussions are needed to fill in the details of joint planning and execution. But how likely is Japan to participate?
I think it would be good to have that possibility, but it's an agreement between South Korea and the US for now. So it seems that the priority is to make sure the agreement is carried out properly between those two countries first.
South Korea's former Consulate General in Osaka, Cho Sung-yeol, said it could happen over a long period of time. However, for this to be possible, he said there must be a change in Japan's attitude, particularly with regard to unsolved disputes such as Japan's territorial claims over Dokdo Island. Although experts are saying that Japan's immediate participation is not likely, progress between Seoul and Tokyo seems to be taking place. Yoon and Kishida welcomed the ongoing progress made on real-time sharing of North Korea's missile launches, which was agreed upon at the trilateral summit of Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington held last November in Phnom Penh. President Yoon underscored that security cooperation is more important than ever as they face common threats from North Korea. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The Biden administration has welcomed the latest summit between South Korea and Japan and their efforts to mend bilateral ties. With this, the Yoon-Kishida summit garnered much attention from American media outlets as well. Han Sang-woo tells us more.
Welcoming their summit, the U.S. State Department has commended South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida for their leadership. Spokesperson Matthew Miller posted on Twitter that the U.S. will continue working with its allies and partners to advance a free, open, prosperous, secure, and resilient Indo-Pacific. Major U.S. media outlets have described Yoon and Kishida's summit as the two nations' resumption of shuttle diplomacy after 12 years, amid increasing regional security threats posed by North Korea and China. However, they also shed light on the fact that the Japanese leader did not meet expectations from many South Koreans that he would offer an official apology on Japan's imperial past and the wartime forced labor of Koreans. The New York Times reported that Kishida upheld some of his predecessor's expressions of remorse and apologies, but, quote, went no further than that, merely saying that his heart ached at the suffering Koreans endured. The newspaper also observed that leading up to the summit, few analysts believed that decades-long tensions would disappear easily due to political pressure at home for both Yoon and Kishida. Citing South Korea's former ambassador to Japan, Shin Gak-soo, the Washington Post acknowledged that Kishida's direct reference to the brutal conditions of life for Koreans under colonial rule was an important gesture that signaled Kishida's understanding of the stakes of his comments. But it added that there's still a long road ahead, saying that rapprochement is still a delicate and politically fraught effort. Han-Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, China's state-run media has said that Sunday's summit was forced by pressure from the United States. Citing China's analysts, the Global Times reported on Monday that the resumption of the back-and-forth shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan was part of Washington's strategic need to contain Beijing. The same article says that under U.S. pressure, Tokyo is using President Yoon Suk-yeol's term as a time window to push bloc confrontation against China, Russia, and North Korea. The report also says that Seoul-Tokyo ties are fragile and unsustainable due to unresolved thorny issues such as the territorial disputes over Tokyo Island. President Yoon Suk-yeol, as he prepares to mark 1 year in office this Wednesday, has released a number of videos on his official YouTube channel in an effort to boost communication with the public. The latest one released on Monday is hashtag 1 year since inauguration. It emphasizes President Yoon's push for sustainable and lasting peace on the peninsula and in the region instead of what he has called fake peace. On domestic front, he sheds light on his labor reforms. Another one released on Sunday with the same hashtag shows people President Yoon has met before sharing their thoughts. This includes shopkeepers at traditional markets as well as Squid Game lead actor Lee Jung-jae. In the video, they share how they would like South Korea to change going forward, with one of the shopkeepers asking for police to help working class people thrive. Economy and Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho says efforts are underway to lay the groundwork for a world-class chip alliance with the U.S. as the authorities embark on working-level follow-ups to the recent Yoon-Biden summit. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon has more on his remarks.
South Korea is aiming for stronger ties with the United States in the semiconductor sector. Measures to follow up President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to Washington last month were discussed during a ministerial meeting on Monday presided over by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho. Chu highlighted the chip industry, saying that Seoul and Washington will lay out the foundations of the bilateral chip alliance based on cooperative projects on next-generation chips, high-tech packaging, and chip material, parts, and equipment. Chip forums between the public and private sectors will also be set up. In terms of the U.S. CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, he mentioned that the two countries are working to reduce the burden and uncertainties faced by South Korean businesses as a consequence of both acts. The finance minister said close consultation on the matter will continue so that it can eventually become a win-win for both Seoul and Washington. Chu also pledged to strengthen ties in advanced technology industries.
We will develop cooperation in the chip, battery, bio, quantum, and digital sectors by establishing a next-generation critical and emerging technologies dialogue led by national security advisors in the second half of this year.
The minister added domestic clusters related to these industries will be further developed, and he will actively engage in putting to work the $5.9 billion of investments secured by President Yoon during his trip to the U.S. The finance ministry also revealed plans to focus on overseas construction projects, factories, nuclear power plants, and eco-friendly businesses in order to reach its target of $35 billion in overseas orders this year. He said he will once again ramp up government-to-government cooperation to win contracts on mega projects such as Saudi's Neom City and the construction of Indonesia's new capital city. To do this, he will provide diplomatic and financial support for these large-scale plant projects in the Middle East while expanding eco-friendly businesses related to green hydrogen and cutting greenhouse gases. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Staying on the local front, a rebound in domestic consumption appears to be keeping the local economy afloat in the face of retreating exports. According to the Korea Development Institute on this Monday, car sales rose 14.5% on-year in March, while travel sales jumped 18.2%. In sharp contrast, the value of exports plunged over 14% on-year in April. Officials at the institute linked the plunge to sluggish demand for semiconductors in the global market, with their production falling by almost 27% on-year. Also on the local front, overall inflation eased to 3.7% in April, but the public is seeing no relief with regard to dining and grocery bills, which have soared in recent times. Kim Hyun-sung reports.
Inflation has slowed recently, but food prices are still climbing, putting a strain on consumers' wallets. According to Statistics Korea on Monday, the inflation rate for consumer prices dropped to 3.7% last month, falling below 4% for the first time in more than a year. But the cost of dining out has increased by a massive 7.6% in April, compared to a year earlier. That's more than double the overall rate, putting the gap between the inflation of dining out costs and the average inflation rate at its widest level in 31 years. Processed foods also saw a high inflation rate of almost 8%. Nearly 30% of food items saw an inflation rate of above 10% last month. Prices for jams and dressings have skyrocketed by more than 30%, while some food items such as cheese, pasta noodles, and fish cakes have seen price increases of more than 20% from the previous year. These price hikes for essential goods and services are hitting the wallets of consumers who are already struggling in a tough economic climate. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
A new government agency providing support for some 7.5 million Koreans overseas will be based in the city of Incheon with an administrative service office in central Seoul. This is according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Monday. The agency, to be launched on June 5th, will carry out policy making for Koreans overseas. It'll also provide administrative support for citizenship, visas, military service, and more, matters that were previously handled by different government bodies. This follows the Parliament's passing in February of a revision to the Government Organization Act, providing the foundation for the establishment of the agency, as well as President Yoon Suk-yeol's signing of the bill promulgating the revision in March. The term overseas Koreans refer to South Korean nationals and people of Korean ethnicity living outside of South Korea. Over in the United States, at least 9 people, including the shooter, were killed when a gunman opened fire at a mall in Allen, Texas on Saturday, prompting calls from President Biden and others for Congress to act on gun control. Among the victims were 3 Korean Americans. Jung Eun-ju has the latest.
8 people were killed and at least 7 others wounded when a gunman opened fire at Allen Premium Outlets Mall in Allen, Texas, Saturday afternoon. Victims ranged in age from 5 to 61 years old, according to a Dallas area medical group. The city's police chief Brian Harvey said on Saturday that an officer was already at the mall for an unrelated call when the gunfire broke out. The officer followed the sound of gunshots, tracked down the shooter, and killed him. Local officials have identified the gunman as 33-year-old Mauricio Garcia. The shooter was armed with an AR-15 style rifle and had at least one other weapon on him when he was gunned down by police. Authorities say specific motives are yet unclear but are investigating whether the shooter was motivated by right-wing extremism. A senior law enforcement source said the shooter was found with an insignia on his clothing that read RWDS, an acronym potentially standing for Right-Wing Death Squad. 3 members of a Korean-American family were also among the deceased victims. The South Korean consulate in Dallas said the couple in their 30s and their 3-year-old son were shot to death in Saturday's shooting spree. Another child of the couple was injured and is being treated at a hospital. In the wake of the mass shooting, U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday called on Congress to pass gun control bills and said he would sign it immediately. President Biden said in a statement Sunday that such an attack is too shocking to be so familiar. The Democratic president renewed calls for Congress to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, as well as to enact universal background checks and end immunity for gun manufacturers. There is little chance the narrowly divided House and Senate would pass such legislation, although polls show most Americans support background checks. There have been 200 mass shootings in the U.S. so far this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines a mass shooting as one in which 4 or more people are shot, excluding the shooter. 정은주, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in India, at least 22 people have died following a boat accident that took place Sunday evening local time. The tourist boat capsized in the Purapuza estuary in the southern district of Kerala. Local media, The Hindu, reported on Monday that the death toll is likely to go up as several passengers are still missing. The exact number or the identities of these passengers are still unknown, but reports said they were mostly families on a tour. The Hindu reported that many of the victims were women and children. Eyewitnesses told The Hindu that boat had nearly double its intended capacity, which is 25.
Tomorrow will be another day with big contrast in daily temperatures, but keep in mind that temperature gaps will widen, with most regions seeing warmer spells. For Seoul, highs will be hiking up to 23 degrees, and for Gangneung and Daegu, conditions will be close to sweltering at 27 degrees. It is much easier to catch a cold during this time of the year, so please be extra careful. The air is circulating at a fairly fast rate, and clean air will continue to take over tomorrow. The entire nation will see air quality standing in the normal to good category. On the East Coast and Jeju Island, please stay away from water. High waves are in the forecast, which could pound nearby piers and breakwaters. Sunny spells will dominate nationwide. Seoul will start off at 11 degrees. Maximum temperatures will be jumping significantly for inland regions. Seoul will be reaching 23 degrees, Gwangju 24, and Daegu will be warm at 27 degrees. No rain is in the forecast for the time being. Conditions will stay warm until Thursday, with highs of 25 degrees in Seoul. That's all for now, and to the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest news tomorrow. Have a good night.
I'm live!
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해줄 수 있는 세션 분들
아무리 봐도 없지. 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.